Hola, clase. Vamos a revisar los irregulares de cambio vocálico en el pretérito. Ya revisamos los irregulares de cambio vocálico en el presente. Ellos son similares, pero hay algunas excepciones. All right, so here is the most important thing that I can tell you about preterite tense stem changers. Not all stem changers will take a stem change in the preterite tense. So in the preterite tense, only IR stem changers will take a stem change in the preterite. So when I say IR stem changers, I mean verbs that end in IR. AR and ER stem changers will never change in the preterite. So as you can see below here, even though empezar is a stem changer in the present tense, right? We have yo empiezo, or querer, quiero, yo quiero. Even though both of those are stem changers in the present tense, because they end in AR and ER, they are not stem changers in the preterite tense. Morir, on the other hand, to die, it is a stem changer in the preterite tense because it ends in an IR. So you can just take all of the verbs that we've learned, like jugar, almorzar, poder, any verbs that end in AR and ER, they just don't change in the preterite. The second thing that you need to know about stem changers in the preterite is that they're very simple when compared to the present tense stem changers. So in the preterite, there are only two types of stem changers in the preterite tense. Remember that we have four different types of stem changers in the present tense. So in the preterite tense, you can only change from an E to an I or an O to a U. Remember, though, that in the present tense, we can go E to IE, or we can also go E to I. So now all of the verbs that fit into those two categories, if they're in a verb that ends in an IR, they're only allowed to go from an E to an I, okay? And then O to U, in the present tense, we used to have O to UE, right? But now those verbs, they can't do that anymore. They can only change their O to a U. So it's just a simpler change. It's one vowel changes into another vowel instead of the possibility that it can change into two different vowels. And then you might be wondering about that fourth category, right? The U to UE. But if you will remember, there's only one verb that fits into that category, which is jugar. And jugar happens to be a verb that ends in an AR. And AR verbs aren't stem changers in the preterite tense. So we just completely wipe out that last category. So we condense two categories. We make one of the categories simpler, and then we just completely get rid of the other category. Here's some examples of E to I verbs that are stem changers in the preterite tense. And I also want to point out one more important rule when it comes to preterite tense stem changers. So if you look at the verb preferir, it does end in IR, and it's a stem changer. So we're going to stem change it, but we're only going to stem change it in two spots. We're only going to stem change it in the el, ella, usted form and the ellos, ellas, ustedes forms. Now, if you'll remember, in the present tense, usually stem changers change in the boot. So they usually change the yo form and the to form, the el, ella, usted form, and then the ellos, ellas, ustedes forms. The only place that present tense stem changers don't change is in that nosotros form, right? But with preterite verbs, they only change in two spots. They only change in the el, ella, usted and the ellos, ellas, ustedes forms, which if you want an easy way to remember that, they only change in the third person. So like the el, ella and the ellos, ellas. Now, of course, you also have usted and ustedes there as well, the formal versions of the second person, but those just get grouped into that third person category, right? So we end up with, for preferir, we end up with preferi, preferiste, prefirió, preferimos, and prefirieran. You will notice, though, that just like present tense stem changers, there is nothing irregular about the endings. So we still have the I, iste, io, imos, and ieran. Okay, so the only thing that you really have to pay attention to is that E that changes to an I in the LA usted form and the ellos, ellas, ustedes form. Also remember that you're not changing that E to an IE like we usually would in the present tense. We're only changing the E to an I. On the right-hand side, you'll see then some of the IR verbs that are still stem changers in the preterite tense. So like pedir, to ask for, competir, to compete, preferir, to prefer, repetir, to repeat, servir, to serve, sentir, to feel, mentir, to lie. It would be wise of you to copy down preferir into your notes in all of its different conjugations, and then go ahead and copy down the verbs on the right there and their meanings so that you can practice those. I have just two examples of O to U verbs in the preterite tense. So the example here that I have for you is morir. So we've got mori, moriste, murió, morimos, and murieron. And you can see that in the el, ella, usted form, the ellos, ellas, ustedes forms, that O, instead of changing to a UE like it does in the present tense, it's going to change to a U. Okay, and then you can also see that the endings are all normal. I, iste, io, imos, and ieran. All right, so you just have to remember that you do not change these stem changers in the yo form or the to form like you usually would in the present tense, and you don't change the nosotros ever, just like you do in the nosotros form. So we've got morir, to die, and dormir, to sleep. Those are two verbs that you should be familiar with from last year and then also from when we studied the present tense stem changers. All right, I want to do a couple examples here with you. You can pause the video and see if you can write out the conjugations for these next two verbs that I'm going to show you. So repetir, we know that it is an E to I stem changer in the preterite tense. So for the yo form, it would be repeti. And remember that we don't change that E in the yo form. For the to form, repetiste. Again, we're not going to change the E. But now we've made it to the third person, okay, el, ella, usted. So we do want to make sure we change that E. Repitió. For nosotros form, we don't ever change nosotros form stem changers, no matter whether they're present tense stem changers or preterite tense. So we have repetimos. And for the last person, ellos, ellas, ustedes, we do want to change it. Then we add our ending on I-E-R-O-N. So we end up with repitieran. So you should have a stem change here and here and nowhere else. And all your endings are regular preterite tense endings. For the verb dormir, we know that it is a O to U stem changer in the preterite tense. So we can go ahead and conjugate that. In the yo form, we don't change the O, so dormi. To form, we don't change the O, dormiste. Now, in the el, ella, usted form, we do change the O to a U, dormió. Nosotros form, we don't change it, dormimos. And for the ellos, ellas, ustedes, we do change it, dormieran. you should only have a stem change here and here. And again, all of your endings should be regular endings in the preterite tense for regular verbs. So iste, io, imos, eran.